What they just passed this last year in the Maryland General Assembly 2025 session was the first of its kind abortion fund. You as a citizen at your state and local level have way more power than you think you do. And if you learn how to effectively harness it, you can seriously change the world. So there's lots and lots of ways to kill bad legislation in a state where you're the underdog, basically, is what I'm saying. And so that's what we learned in Maryland, and this is how we did it.
From the front lines of Maryland's cultural and political battles comes a woman who knows firsthand what it means to stand for life. Once calling herself pro-choice, Allie Rock's perspective shifted forever when she became a mother and saw the humanity of her child in the womb. That conviction launched her into a lifetime of activism, organizing grassroots efforts, leading the fight against abortion referendums, and pushing back on government overreach, and giving a voice to those too often silenced. Today, Allie serves as the Maryland State Director of the State Freedom Caucus Network and as the founder of Freedom from Violence Maryland. All of it while raising her 6 children and living her faith boldly. This is living pro-life. Hey, welcome, Allie, to the program. I'm so glad that you are here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I know you're doing a lot of work there in Maryland, but I do know that at one point along the way, you called yourself pro-choice, and now you're working your tail off, having great babies and other things in your life today. And call yourself pro-life. So tell us a little bit about what was that transition and what really put you over the edge to really defend human life?
So I grew up in a pretty secular household, always called myself pro-choice. It seemed like the pragmatic view, voted Democrat at age 18. I went off to college. I was actually the Women's Center leader at Gettysburg College, where I was allowed to have any political beliefs that I wanted, but I had to be pro-choice. That was like the non-negotiable. When I met my husband my senior year, we started dating. He had been pro-life his whole life. And it was something I told him was off the table to ever talk about, which was funny because when we found ourselves pregnant right after our wedding with a honeymoon baby, that is actually the turning point for me. My oldest son, Matthew, my first baby, had a wonky ultrasound, basically, early on. They thought something might be wrong with him. So we had to go to those high-level doctors and ultrasounds, and I had a chorionic villus sampling early on. I got to see him really bounce around on that screen, trying to get away from just that tiny little needle prick that comes with a CVS. And I started kind of questioning my beliefs at that point, but when he was 18 weeks and I could feel him kick, I remember literally where I was, stopped dead in my living room, just horrified because I'd already seen him on the ultrasound screen so many times, what kind of procedure would have to end his life, and knowing that 18 weeks is elective territory. I'd gone to school in Pennsylvania where the legal limit was 24 weeks. So thinking there's 6 more weeks I can make this decision, and really kind of feeling like I'd been lied to. That was kind of my turning point, what made me pro-life. And then I just sort of, kind of backed myself down from like, okay, late term's wrong, to, okay, first trimester's also wrong. I'm personally pro-life. But it was actually David Daleiden's Center for Medical Progress expose in the summer of 2015 that just catapulted me to activism. I was just like, we cannot sit around and let this, So that's just my personality. I'm a doer. So that's kind of how I got into, I went to my local Right to Life meeting and I was like, I'm here to help.
Well, so tell us a little bit, for the listeners who don't know about David Daleiden or the work that he did, tell us a little bit about that and why was that so transformational?
So that was David Daleiden had done, I believe it was 2 years undercover operational sting against Planned Parenthood and the fetal tissue market. He went undercover at conferences, in clinics, and he had high-level meetings where he posed as a biomedical tissue procurement company. And he got on video in California, I believe New Mexico, Texas, all over the country, these high-level Planned Parenthood executives admitting that they were selling donated fetal remains for a profit. He had caught them in the absolute most, like, just really a light where it was really shocking to people. And he released these videos once or twice a week over like a 6 or 7 week period. And that is what catapulted the conversation about defunding Planned Parenthood 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've seen the fruits of that, you know, in them getting at least this 1 year defund in the big, beautiful bill that passed last month.
Absolutely. So talking about laws and bills and other things like that, there was a big referendum there in Maryland. And, it's relevant for what's happening all around the country, because there was one here in Missouri, one down in Florida, and several other states. But in Maryland, there was a lot of unique things that happened, and I know you were heavily involved in that. So tell us about Maryland and what happened with the referendum.
So Maryland, I mean, here's where we get a little controversial. The pro-life movement looks at their lack of resources, which we do. I mean, we are small but mighty. You know, we have spirit and truth, and we have great activists all around the country, but we just do not have the funding that the big giants have. So there were no national organizations that pledged support to Maryland. There was no, greater coalition, especially once it looked like so many other states were going to be facing referenda in 2024, of course, aligned with the presidential election. So it really was just, the boots on the ground here. For a short time, I was leading Maryland Right to Life as the board president, but I really didn't see much effort happening to actually attack or really approach the referendum from a life perspective. I believe that a lot of states have not learned the lessons of those early referenda states like Ohio, Michigan, even Kansas. And the executive directors of the affiliates in those states will tell you the lessons they learned. And I just feel like nobody's really listening.
Well, what kind of lessons? So like those are the things we want to hear right now.
Yeah. So the lessons are, you have to be truthful. Okay. The voters can see when you're trying to manipulate them, you're trying to tell them that their eyes and ears are lying to them about what the referendum is about. These referenda are about abortion. They're about abortion through all 9 months, and we have to state that unequivocally. And we also have to note, like in Ohio, exit polls showed that people were more afraid of abortion being cut off at heartbeat, at 6 weeks, than they were abortion through all 9 months. This is a culture we have to reckon with, And so where we find bridges for people in order to bridge, connections between pro-life and pro-choice people are tried and true. Late-term abortion, minor, like parental consent, those sorts of things. When people start to imagine their daughters being kind of taken to clinics by people like they don't have, they haven't given consent to, a teacher, a pastor, and then taxpayer funding. What we have found that doesn't motivate people is trying to tell them that this is an ulterior motive for another, nefarious purpose, like transgender operations for children or things like that. It's just too far-fetched. And that's kind of what we were seeing kind of creep into the Maryland debate. These things were tried in Ohio and failed. So that's basically where I split off. That's how I started my current organization, Freedom from Violence Maryland. It started as a ballot issue committee, but we got started late. August 1st of 2024, we had 3 months, but we were determined that we were going to tell the truth to voters. And so we learned a lot of lessons along the way. If we could have started a year early, I think we would have made an impact. I don't think we would have won, but we might have kept it close. 3-1, 75-25. Question 1 actually outpaced Trump in our state, which means Republican voters were voting for question 1. And this is what I mean. It was not well publicized. I mean, and it was very confusing. By trying to convince people it wasn't really about abortion, it was about all reproductive, issues, and going to the wildest conclusions. That's really kind of what I saw as what was confusing voters. But we found incredible, valuable information when we did the things that are harder to do, more expensive to do, but give us the best data. And that was talking to people. So we phone banked hours and hours a week. For 3 months, we did local outreach at our county fair when we could talk to people about what the laws currently were in Maryland, which was no true legal limit. We actually found that people were really, even who considered themselves pro-choice, believe that third trimester abortion is a bridge too far. And so what basically we've seen in our mission now, my volunteers, my husband and I, is that we've got to rebuild the pro-life brand in this state and just start by educating the public on what really is happening. Because when you get a chance to talk to them, people are very reasonable. And so we also have to accept, that we're going back to incrementalism. We're going back to getting people to agree third trimester is wrong, and that's where we should draw a line. And then we can start to back pay it. But in Maryland, we have, through all 9 months, taxpayer funded, minor consent loopholes you could drive a truck through. These were on the books before our referendum. But what they just passed this last year in the Maryland General Assembly 2025 session was the first of its kind abortion fund. So you may have seen headlines. You can look that up. But what they did was they have been basically holding a pot of money that's been collected from every ratepayer during for the Affordable Care Act for 12 years. It's about $1 a month on your policy. And it's been into this fund, and it's for this purpose. It has been for abortion and things like that. And Maryland is the first that's been able to pass a law that's unleashed those funds to now be accessed to pay for people's abortions who can't afford them.
Wow. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in Maryland, but I know you've seen some glimmer of hope and success in the state legislature there at the state capitol. So tell me about kind of that on-the-ground activism where we can really make an impact.
Yeah, so this is like, if I could really grasp every pro-life person, anybody who feels helpless, and drive home this point that you as a citizen at your state and local level have way more power than you think you do. And if you learn how to effectively harness it, you can seriously change the world. That would be the one thing that I would like to transmit. But after I decided, I had to get more involved in the pro-life movement, coming from the pro-choice side, no one had ever made really good arguments to me, right? It's just kind of the shrieking, it's a baby, it's very highly emotional,
Right.
Those sorts of things. So apologetics was something I got into very early on, how to defend life. We have the best philosophical arguments, and there's lots of apostolates for that. Big fan of Equal Rights Institute, Steve Wagner from Justice for All, Scott Klusendorf. You can read books and books and books. And I noticed that pro-life people needed that. So we actually started a grassroots conference. So for apologetics in 2016, we did that for 3 or 4 years. But during our first conference, the lobbyist for Maryland Right to Life at the time, Jeff Meiser is his name, he taught us how to be citizen lobbyists and how to lobby your own local elected official. And to me, that was gold. I mean, I left there saying, we're going to do this. So my county Right to Life affiliate is very well acquainted with the Maryland General Assembly, which runs January through April, how bills become laws. And in most state legislatures, you work on with what's called a committee structure. So legislation is introduced and it first gets assigned to a committee. The committee holds a public hearing where testimony can be given by experts, but also from citizens can weigh in. Then the committee debates whether the legislation should move forward or not, how it might be amended, and that before it hits the floor. Then it hits the floor, and if you have a bicameral legislature, it's got to go to the other house. So there's lots and lots of ways to kill bad legislation in a state where you're the underdog, basically, is what I'm saying. Yep. And so that's what we learned in Maryland. And part of the pro-life movement here in Maryland is we're still every year facing the threat of physician-assisted suicide, which some people consider a life issue, some people don't. In this state, we do. So that's kind of where we got a lot of our experience, was killing, physician-assisted suicide at the committee level. But in 2019, my county was instrumental in killing it after it had passed the House floor. And this is how we did it. Our state senator for our county was a co-sponsor of the bill. That's where you as a citizen have a lot of power. If your legislator sits on the committee, is co-sponsoring or sponsoring the legislation because it's personal to them. The rest of the body doesn't really want to hear from you to oppose a bill that isn't even in front of them, right?
Yeah.
So we went to work on our state senator. We called, we emailed, we visited him up in Annapolis. And we convinced him to pull his name off the bill first. Then we secured from him a promise to vote no.
Wow.
That year in 2019, the legislation passed narrowly, but it passed the House of Delegates in Maryland when it has to go then to a Senate committee, and then it has to go to the Senate floor. That bill died that year on a 23-23 tie vote on the floor. If we
Wow.
had not flipped our senator, physician-assisted suicide would be legal in the state of Maryland. And that's the power of a citizen lobbyist and
That's incredible.
you flexing your citizen power.
He went from a co-signer, a co-sponsor on that bill to all of a sudden voting no on it. What an incredible victory. An incredible victory. We're going to switch gears just a little bit because it's been a little while since we talked about this thing called COVID. I think it's very interesting that, here we are many years later where the country is shut down, right? Completely shut down unless you are a so-called essential business. And apparently in most states, abortion apparently was a essential business. But we'll leave that off to the side here.
Right.
But tell us about how that worked, how you reacted, the people around you reacted. Not that we are a pro or against COVID or shots or anything else, but I think we as citizens could learn a few things from what happened through the COVID process.
Yeah, so it was because of my experience in the pro-life movement that when COVID hit, I was able to basically start a movement from scratch to push back against some of the COVID lockdowns and policies. So if you Google my name, you might see Reopen Charles County, which was, something I started. I started a Facebook page on my phone in 2020. So I had just relayed to you the 2019, victory over PAS. When, COVID hit, it was like, Activist Alley, rose up again. So I use those same exact tactics. And I guess like the greater point is like why I think it's people who feel like they have leadership potential or want to learn how to, get people rallied to a cause like this. You just have to get started basically. But I was able to amass a following, about 1,500 people in my deep blue county here in Charles. And we pushed back against an extended reclosure or closure. So our governor in May of 2020 started to reopen the state, but my county commissioners decided to stay closed for 2 more weeks. Small businesses were suffering, school children were suffering, my children were suffering. I'm a homeschooling mom. I was suffering, my church was suffering. So basically just rose up, pushed back, and every other reopening phase from May 2020 after we kind of gobsmacked them with, we had emails going directly. We had hundreds of emails going directly. They went along with the governor's reopening for the next year. There was just no question after that. We hit them every single time there was a new phase. We hit them with hundreds and hundreds of emails and phone calls overnight. But they actually tried to initiate a mask mandate in 2021 after the governor actually ended his state of emergency. Our county tried to enact a new one. And that is where we turned to the courts. So we actually crowdfunded and sustained a 4-month-long lawsuit, just literally with $50 and $100 donations over a course of 4 months. I learned a lot about the legal system. And we were able to pressure them to withdraw their emergency. They tried to pass a mask mandate legislatively, and we killed that through those same citizen lobbying techniques I described for physician-assisted suicide. In-person meetings, phone calls. We showed up en masse at the public hearing. It was like 70 opposed to like 6 in favor. And it also died on a technicality. It needed a supermajority of 4-1 vote to win. It died on a 3-2. So it's like just another story of the underdog, the little guy can win, when you have enough passion.
Well, I'd like to switch a little bit here and talk to you about kind of just your personal life. A lot of our listeners are going to be moms who are just, every day just kind of walking through, trying to survive. But here you are, not just, surviving, but thriving with 6 kids. And of course, the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So tell us a little bit about that, and maybe a little bit of advice for some of those younger moms or maybe not so young moms along the way.
Yeah. So I am, as my priest once described me, uber Catholic. I love my faith. My husband and I have a very rock solid marriage where we are true, partners, pray together. We're raising our kids together in the same way. So I do want to give credit, firstly to my husband, who has always, always been my rock and my support when I have these crazy ideas. But, I homeschool. I was a former public school teacher. When I had my first baby, I just was like, the first year I had to put him in daycare while I was still working. And I just decided I didn't want to do that. And there were years that we were absolutely rubbing two nickels together to, putting groceries on a credit card, selling things like on the online yard sale. So you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
get through those. And you just, I wanted to always be around my children. My children they've come to the March for Life. They've come to COVID rallies. Like they are my little activist buddies. But how do I balance it? I really don't. I just think that's a myth that you really can balance things. I read a book once, actually recommended to me by David Wright. It's called The One Thing. And it was like the idea of balance is a myth. Like your life goes like this instead. And you focus on some things that are important for the here and now, and other things go by the wayside. But then when that here and now thing is resolved, you can go back. So
Yeah.
you'll see me in my life. I actually am like the bowstring, so it's like I work full time now for the State Freedom Caucus Network. I'm in Annapolis with, 7 legislators in the Maryland Freedom Caucus. During the legislative session, I was away from my family for 3 months. So the bowstring was really tight, but now we're in the summer and we're outside of legislative session. So it's a little bit more family time. So
Yeah.
I think if I could give advice to, moms who are kind of like in the trenches, first of all, your kids do grow up. My oldest is, off to high school. He's just made JV soccer. Like I can't, he's got size 11 men's shoes. Like this is wild to me. That's, you will get out of it. I know it's hard to say that, but also give up the idea of balance and instead focus on what's important for the here and now, and you'll get back to the other stuff later. I guess that's kind of, if I could wrap a bow on it.
Wow, what great advice from our dear friend Ali Rock. They're from the great state of Maryland and the State Freedom Caucus. Ali, you are one of my best guests. Not to say anything about some of the others, but Ali, you've done fantastic. You're doing a lot of incredible work on the ground, and I think you said it right, that we should be focusing on what God's calling us to in that specific moment in time, what's right in front of us, what is the present and now. So, Ali, thanks for being on the program, and
Thanks for having me.
Your work.
Thank you.